Welcome to this installment of Some Perspectives on the Gospel of John. I'm your tour guide, Ray Crafton. In today's episode, we'll be looking at chapters 18 and 19. The hour of Jesus' glorification has now arrived, and these two chapters of the fourth Gospel are full of symbolic imagery that seeks to explain this most significant event in humankind's history of salvation. As a mentor of mine used to say, getting started is half done, so let's get started. You may remember this picture of the temple from our discussion of chapter 10. At that time, it was winter, and Jesus was walking in the portico of Solomon, and he was surrounded and asked, "Are you the Messiah? Tell us straight out if you are." Well, it's now spring, and Solomon's portico and the Golden or East Gate look eastward across the Kidron Valley at the Mount of Olives and the Garden of Gethsemane. And much of what happens in chapters 18 and 19 will take place in that valley and on that hillside. That previous picture, if seen from above, would look like this. In this diagram, east is at the bottom of the picture, and you can see the portico of Solomon and the Golden Gate facing east, facing out across the Kidron Valley, which runs across the entire bottom of the picture, at the Mount of Olives and Gethsemane. Mark and Matthew set the arrest of Jesus on the Mount of Olives and in the Garden of Gethsemane. Luke just mentions the Mount of Olives. John, however, describes this as having taken place somewhere on the other side of the Kidron Valley in a garden. And so why has John not stuck with the same description that the synoptics have used? He's changed it for a reason. The fourth gospel cites the arrest of Jesus in the same area as the synoptics, but it describes it differently. And it does so in order to put forward these themes. First of all, Kidron Valley. Kidron is from the Hebrew word for dark. And so in the fourth gospel, after the Last Supper, we get an image of the model shepherd leading his flock through the valley of darkness. And of course, that calls to mind immediately Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil. The model shepherd is with us and is on his way to surrendering his life for his sheep. Also, from Old Testament times, the upper end of the Kidron Valley was known as the King's Garden or the King's Valley. And if you think back across the fourth Gospel's chapters, you can see that the theme of kingship wends its way through the fourth gospel, beginning with Nathanael, who says, "Rabbi, you are the King of Israel." And after the Eucharist on the Mount, the crowd attempts to make Jesus king. And at on Palm Sunday, at the entry into Jerusalem, the crowd shouts, "Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord," and then adds something that the synoptics don't have, even the King of Israel. And when we get to Jesus and his interview with Pilate, what will wend its way through that interview is Pilate's question of, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And so the King's Valley is Jesus' Valley. The Upper Kidron was also identified in the prophet Joel as being the Valley of Jehoshaphat. Actually, it became identified that way. Joel doesn't actually cite where that valley is, but in popular understanding after Joel, it was identified as being the upper end of the Kidron. And that's the place of Armageddon. And so the fourth gospel has overlaid on this scene of the arrest the fact that this is Armageddon. This is the end. And we'll see later on that the end imagery comes back again as Jesus is buried. It's the end of time, in a sense, and the beginning of something new. It's also called in popular parlance, the valley of decision. And it's in this valley that the forces of darkness will decide not to follow the Son of Man, but to follow the dark. Jerusalem's necropolis was there. And as a result of Joel and the necropolis being there, it was expected that the Messiah at the end of time would make his appearance first in that spot and then enter the temple through the east or golden gate. Finally, John has said that the arrest takes place in a garden. Think about that. Think back to the Garden of Eden and hold that in the back of your mind for the time when we get to chapter 20, and we're in the Garden of Resurrection. In the fourth gospel, Judas leads the arrest party, just as he does in the synoptic accounts. But who is with him? Mark and Matthew indicate the presence only of Jewish forces. They describe it as a crowd dispatched by the chief priests, scholars, and elders, a crowd that's wielding swords and clubs. The reference to swords is a tip-off that perhaps the Romans are present, because only Roman soldiers were allowed to carry swords. The temple police would have carried clubs. Luke just says it's a crowd. John is explicit about saying that Roman soldiers are present with temple police. The leader of the Roman forces is called a kiliarchos, that is, a leader of 1,000, which meant that this was a leader of a cohort of 600 men. And the Gospel of John also uses the Greek word for a Roman cohort, that is, the word spera. So the Roman and Jewish authorities have a common cause here. They want to keep Jerusalem quiet during Passover. The Romans don't want any Jewish or Jesus spring on their hands. They don't want an uprising. And the Jewish authorities don't want an uprising because of the Roman counterattack that might be so forceful as to destroy the temple. Johannine detail in this account. The arrest party is carrying lanterns and torches. This is not found in the synoptics. And it's symbolic that here are the forces of darkness, and in the dark, they're unable to see the light of the world. They resort to human light. In the fourth gospel, when Jesus is arrested, something happens that's unlike the synoptics, and that is Jesus is in charge. He asks the questions. Whom do you seek? And when they say Jesus of Nazareth, he confirms his identity by uttering the divine name, I am. Because to say, I am he, in Greek is simply the words ego eimi, I am. And that, of course, is the Greek equivalent of the Hebrew divine name, Yahweh. And look at what happens when he utters the divine name. The arresters fall to their knees. And that includes the Romans. As he has said earlier, I will draw all to myself. Previously, it was the Greeks coming, and Jesus remarked that the hour of his glorification was drawing near. Now it's the Romans, and the hour has arrived. It's the hour for Jesus lifting up. Jesus asks, whom do you seek, a second time? And again, they say, Jesus of Nazareth. And again, Jesus utters the divine name, I am. And notice what that does. It then allows the disciples are then allowed to go free. Jesus says, take me, let the others go. And that's what happens, remarkably enough. And this is the fulfillment of Jesus' high priestly prayer in chapter 17, when he prayed, protect my followers, Father, in my name and in your name. And that's exactly what now happens. Jesus' use of the divine name seems to be corroborated by anti-Christian sources. Opposing sources also seem to remark on this. A first century CE anti-Christian legend said that Jesus was a sorcerer who performed magic because he knew God's real name. And the Babylonian Talmud says that Jesus was killed because of sorcery, apostasy, and false prophecy. Well, be that as it may, Pilate and his Roman forces have a different goal. They don't necessarily need to kill this guy. They just want to get him off the streets, at least during the festival. And that will become clear during Jesus' interview with Pilate. In the fourth gospel, after Jesus is arrested, the first thing that happens is that he's taken to the high priest Annas. This is not in the synoptic accounts. So why is it here? Is it because it's historical and the fourth gospel knows about something the synoptics don't know about? Or is it another case of being thematic, where the fourth gospel is seeking to overlay meanings and symbols onto events? Or is it perhaps both? From the standpoint of being possibly historical, the Gospel of Luke and the Acts of the Apostles both mention Annas as being high priest during this era. So that's a historical fact. And here in the 18th chapter of the fourth gospel, we have this little interlude where there's another disciple with Peter. And this other disciple is known to the high priest and therefore is able to get past the doorkeeper and into the high priest's courtyard. And by dint of his relationship with the high priest, is able to talk Peter past the doorkeeper as well. Well, that sounds like a historical detail. From a historical point of view, it's possible to see this as a last attempt to intimidate Jesus into silence. Look at how he's treated. He's slapped around. He asks for a trial. There's no response to that request. So perhaps it was to intimidate him. Another purpose this might have served from a historical point of view is Annas may have been gathering charges to forward on to Caiaphas, who was going to oversee the Sanhedrin, the council's trial of Jesus. In support of that idea, notice that in verse 19, the questions that Annas puts forward are said to be about Jesus' teachings and his followers. That would imply a suspicion of false prophecy. But in the end, the fourth gospel lacks a trial before the Sanhedrin. It doesn't even show one. So possibly this is historical, but it's definitely thematic. Because here you have Annas, who is the elder statesman of Jewish religion. Caiaphas is high priest, yes, and he's Annas' son-in-law. Caiaphas is high priest because the Romans have decided to install him. That doesn't change the fact that traditionally in Judaism, Annas is high priest for life. So he is the elder statesman of Jewish religion here. And he rejects Jesus. As the prologue to the Gospel of John said, Jesus came to what was his own, and his own people did not receive him. So here you have it again. Notice that, as I mentioned earlier, Jesus urges Annas to try him, and that request goes unanswered. So this, again, appears to be a case of they hated me without a cause. That line from the Psalms, which Jesus uttered back in chapter 15. So it definitely has thematic elements to it. In the fourth gospel, as in the synoptics, Peter denies Jesus. Recall that at his arrest, Jesus twice says, ego eimi, I am, or I am he. And Peter, when he denies Jesus, twice says, uk eimi, I am not. And so the gospel sets up this symmetry between Jesus being the I am and Peter denying the I am with uk eimi. The words of Peter's third denial are not mentioned. The fourth gospel just says he does it a third time, but doesn't disturb the symmetry between ego eimi and uk eimi. So it's 2 for 2. Peter denies Jesus while standing next to an anthrakion in the fourth gospel. That's the Greek word for a charcoal fire, and only the fourth gospel has that detail. The synoptics have Peter standing next to a nondescript fire, or in one case, he's near the light warming himself, and you're supposed to conclude that, okay, there's light, so there must be a fire. Why bother to do this? This is going to set up another connection, this one going forward rather than backward. And it goes forward to chapter 21, because the risen Christ and Peter will be standing next to another anthrakion on the beach, when the risen Christ will ask Peter 3 times, do you love me? Giving Peter a chance to rehabilitate himself once for each time that he denied Jesus. So the anthrakion, the charcoal fire, connects those two things, the denial and the rehabilitation. After Peter's third denial, it's said in the fourth gospel that immediately the cock crowed. Well, an interesting historical point. Raising cocks in Jerusalem is known to have been forbidden at that time. We're not sure that it was scrupulously observed, so maybe there are roosters in town. But there's something else here. The trumpet that signaled the end of the third watch was called the cock crow. The third watch ran from 12 midnight to 3 a.m. So, per Roman practice, Pilate's office opened at essentially dawn at 6 a.m. And so this wonderfully concentrates the mind here in terms of the chronology. We have Jesus being with Annas up until 3 o'clock. He's then with Caiaphas from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. And then he's at Pilate's office for the interview there from 6 a.m. and it will last onward until noon when Pilate finally renders a decision. As we prepare to go to the hearing before Pilate, let's observe that the synoptics do have Jesus' trial before the Sanhedrin. Yet the Gospel of John omits that. There's a skip from verse 24 to verse 28 relative to Caiaphas and any presumed appearance before the council. The gospel does this, I think, because we already know what Caiaphas and the council think. It was said back in chapter 11 where Caiaphas addressed the council and said, you people know nothing. It is expedient, more expedient for one man to die for the nation than for the entire nation to perish. So we already know what these people think and what they're going to do. They're going to convict Jesus, and it'll be a capital offense for sure. Also, we already have Annas, Caiaphas's father-in-law, and the foremost elder statesman of Judaism. He's already done the rejecting of Jesus. What this does is this allows the gospel to now concentrate on Pilate. And so we're going to have a lengthy interaction among Pilate, the crowd, and Jesus. And in this interaction, Pilate's going to attempt and fail to remain neutral. And there's a moral to this story, a major moral. And it is that When it comes to belief in Jesus as the Christ, to remain neutral is to become a tool of sin and unrighteousness. In other words, the gospel's word to everyone for the rest of time is neutrality is not level ground. Neutrality is a slippery slope, and it leads downhill. A couple of items of background before we look at the hearing before Pilate. In chapter 18, Pilate says to the Jewish authorities, "Take him yourselves and crucify him." And the Jewish leaders respond, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." That indeed seems to be a historical fact. Scholarly opinion is that the Romans had preempted Jewish authorities from carrying out capital punishment. Why would they have done that? Well, think about it. Otherwise, the Jewish leaders could have executed pro-Roman collaborators at will. And of course, the Romans don't want that. So the whole reason the Jewish leaders have come to Pilate to have Jesus executed is they can't do it. Well, why does Pilate then say something that's ridiculous here? Take him yourselves and crucify him. He knows they can't do it, and they know they can't do it. Well, adding to the ridiculousness of the comment is he urges them to crucify him. That's not something the Jews ever would have done. That's not their mode of capital punishment. They would have stoned Jesus for blasphemy and the other things he was accused of. Crucifixion is only for Roman capital punishment, and it's reserved for those who are accorded a dishonorable death. The most honorable way Romans had of inflicting capital punishment was by beheading. The less honorable ways were things like hanging and crucifixion. So how do we understand this comment of Pilate's that seems so ridiculous? It's one of exasperation, and it will fit into Pilate's slide towards unrighteousness. The other piece of background is in chapter 19, where Pilate is once again trying to release Jesus. And the Jewish leaders say to him something interesting. If you release this man, you are no friend of the emperor. Everyone who claims to be a king sets himself against the emperor. Well, friend of the emperor is a special term here in terms of being part of the inner circle of people who are upwardly mobile in the Roman power structure. Why do the Jews say this? They have leverage on Pilate. Historically, we know the following, and they knew this, that Pilate's patron, Sejanus, had recently been executed for plotting to become Caesar. That occurred in 31 of the Common Era. So Pilate's mentor was now dead. And Pilate was, having lost his mentor in the power structure, he was now at risk. So the Jews have leverage, and they use it here to their advantage. So the Jewish authorities bring Jesus before Pilate in hopes that Pilate will execute him. Pilate's inquiry opens, as any inquiry would, with seeking information. What's the accusation against this man? But as it rolls along, you can see Pilate by turns either attempting to distance himself from this whole thing or attempting to remain neutral. In other cases, he gets confused and seeks more information. The attempted distancings usually come in the form of an exasperated comment like, "Take him yourselves and crucify him," or "What is truth?" The attempts at neutrality, 3 times he's going to say, "I find no case against this man." And yet, in the end, he'll wind up condemning him to crucifixion. There's a current running through this that has to do with Jesus' kingship, because the only way Pilate's going to render a judgment of death is if he can tag this guy with insurrection against the political establishment. And that's why the idea of kingship keeps coming up over and over again. Early in the interview, Pilate says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" I recently came across a translation that sticks to the word order that's in the Greek, and I was kind of floored by it. You can read the Greek as Pilate being incredulous and saying, "You are the king of the Jews?" And you can almost see Pilate doing air quotes with his fingers around king of the Jews. You? Well, then later on, Pilate's confused. So you are a king? And then still further on, he says to the crowd, "So do you want me to release the king of the Jews?" Another one of these attempts at neutrality. Give them a choice. They'll say, "Sure, release him." Well, that backfires. So what happens next is that Pilate attempts to placate the Jewish authorities. By having Jesus flogged, crowned with thorns, and taunted, he hopes to give them a little bit of what they're looking for, but yet not the whole thing, not the execution that they're seeking, because he's not finding a case that warrants execution. But in placating these people, he's now on the slippery slope. His feet are just now beginning to go out from under him. Again, he attempts neutrality. "I find no case." Again, he says, "Take him yourselves and crucify him." Again, "I find no case." And then he's forced to seek more information. The Jewish authorities hit a nerve with him when they say Jesus ought to die because he's styled himself as the Son of God. And Pilate, we're told, is more afraid than ever. And now he wants to know, where are you from? This is the golden moment. This is the moment when others in the gospel have received the gift of God, and they've recognized that Jesus is Son of Man, Son of God, the Christ. And so that moment for Pilate has now arrived. And it passes without taking root. Once more, Pilate attempts neutrality, essentially says to Jesus, "Work with me here. I have power to release and power to crucify. Give me something to go on here." And Jesus doesn't do it because it isn't the idea, it isn't the plan that he and the Father have. Pilate then attempts one more time to release Jesus, and that's when they use their leverage on him, and Pilate caves in and orders crucifixion. The fourth Gospel's text of the hearing before Pilate has a number of things in it that I found striking, and I've put these on the slide. The Gospel of John makes it crystal clear that this is all taking place before Passover, and it does that in multiple places in chapters 18 and 19. In verse 5 of chapter 19, Pilate's presentation of Jesus to the crowd is his coronation. He's enrobed in purple. He's crowned, ironically crowned with thorns. He has not yet been enthroned upon the cross, but he has had his anointing at Bethany when Lazarus' sister Mary anointed his feet. He has had his royal procession into the city of David when the crowd waved symbols of nationalism and proclaimed him king. And now here the Roman authority presents him to his own people as a king. "Behold the man," says Pilate, the word in Greek being anthropos. When Pilate says that, it may well be a reference to Zechariah chapter 6. In the Greek version of Zechariah, we find the verse 12 that reads, "Behold a man whose name is the branch. He shall build the temple of the Lord." And that's precisely what Jesus is about to do. His crucified and glorified body, we've already been told in the fourth gospel, is the true temple of the Lord. And he has been identified over and over again with the righteous branch of the Hebrew Scriptures. Interestingly enough, the Greek text of Zechariah, when it says, "Behold a man," does not use the word anthropos. Anthropos can mean man. It can also refer to a woman. It can refer to a child. Its primary meaning is simply human being. However, the Greek text of Zechariah says, "Behold a man," and uses the word aner. That means man, and it can only mean man. It means a mature male human being. It can't be a woman. It can't be a child. It's a real man, somebody who can do the heavy lifting, who's got the muscle. And that's the kind of man whose name is the branch. He shall build the temple of the Lord. At one point in the interrogation with Pilate, Jesus says to Pilate, "You would have no power over me unless it had been given you from above." Here's that word anothen again, above. A reminder that everything that is happening in the hour in which Jesus is glorified is from above. This is the plan that the Father and Son have worked out. This is how they see it. This is how we're invited to see it. Pilate's condemnation of Jesus comes at noon on the day of preparation, and we're told that in chapter 19, verses 13 to 16. And that's a significant moment. Our writer, whoever was involved in writing this gospel, as I've said before, knew very well Jewish customs, Jewish law, and at that moment, noon on the day of preparation, was the moment that the priests in the temple began the slaughter of the lambs for the Passover meal. And so this fulfills what was said way back in the Gospels, chapter 1, when John the Baptist said, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." In the fourth gospel, the crucifixion differs in a number of respects from the way it's described in the synoptics, and I've tried to highlight those in yellow here on this slide. First of all, there's no Simon of Cyrene in the fourth gospel to help Jesus carry the cross. Jesus alone carries the wood for his sacrifice, and in so doing, it evokes the image of the young Isaac in Genesis 22, who also carried the wood for his sacrifice. Isaac, of course, in Genesis was saved at the last moment from death. Jesus, the new Isaac, will undergo death but be resurrected. And like the Isaac of old, the promise to Abraham that his descendants will be as numerous as the stars, that promise will proceed through Jesus, the new Isaac, just as it did once through the old Isaac. Similar to the synoptics, Jesus carries the cross out of the city. 19.17 says Jesus went out. So it's apparently beyond the city walls. And as in the synoptics, it's to the place of the skull. And just so there's no confusion here, different languages refer to the place of the skull with their own words. Greek is kraniou, Aramaic is the Golgotha, and the Latin word for skull is Calvary. So it's known by all of those. It's the same place. We don't know exactly where it was, but it apparently is outside of the city somewhere. Then there's Pilate's inscription on the cross and the protest that it arouses. The protest is different and the inscription that Pilate places on the cross is different from the synoptics. First of all, Pilate's inscription, unlike the synoptics, includes the words Jesus the Nazarene. That's ironic in the sense that it harks back to the first chapter of John, where it was asked, can anything good come from Nazareth? And the irony, of course, is no, nothing important, just the Savior of the world. Also, Pilate's inscription is trilingual in the fourth gospel. It's said to have carried the words King of the Jews in Latin, Greek, and Aramaic, or what the gospel calls Hebrew. This trilingual announcement is meant to internationalize the death of Jesus. This is for all people everywhere, throughout the known world. The known world is being covered by this trilingual announcement. And unlike the synoptics, the fourth gospel has the Jews, the Jewish authorities, protesting this. Well, you should have written, he said he was king. And you can hear or imagine Pilate's pushback. You guys wanted him dead. The only way I'm going to kill him is if he is a king. And so he's a king. What I've written, I've written. Deal with it. So the Jews didn't want him to be their king. Pilate has made him their king. We also have Jesus being numbered with the transgressors in fulfillment of a prophecy in Isaiah 53. This is like the synoptics. Jesus is crucified between two others. Something that is not in the synoptics is this business of the four soldiers who divide Jesus' hematia, his outer garments, and who cast lots for his chiton, his undergarment. We have the division of Jesus' garments in the synoptics, and that's in fulfillment of a Hebrew scripture, Psalm 22. But in the fourth gospel, it's four soldiers. These are Roman soldiers, and by having four of them, it makes me think, and others too, think of the four cardinal points of the compass: north, south, east, and west. The Roman Empire, throughout the known world. The death of Jesus is something that will be known. It will affect and be divided, if you will, throughout the world. The fact that Jesus is naked on the cross, all of his clothing are now at the foot of the cross being divided, is an image that harks back to Maundy Thursday when he's naked and washing the feet of the disciples. This is the Jesus who lays down his life and whose love makes him entirely vulnerable. Nakedness in public was especially offensive to Jewish sensibilities. So it was also a way of gigging the Jewish authorities. They would have found this particularly offensive. Finally, the chiton, the undergarment, it is said in the fourth gospel, is seamless. And seamlessness is something that's found in priestly garments. See Exodus 28 for that. So the fourth gospel has managed to evoke here the high priestliness of Jesus with his seamless chiton. It's managed to refer back to Maundy Thursday and his vulnerability and his service to humanity, and that this is for all people everywhere. No matter what your language is, no matter where you live, no matter what point on the compass. This one's for you. The fourth gospel is unique in placing a group of women and the beloved disciple at the foot of the cross. Because New Testament Greek doesn't use punctuation, it's open to interpretation whether there were 3 or 4 women at the cross, and the better reading is 4. In other words, these were Jesus' mother, Jesus' maternal aunt, and neither of them is named. Then Mary, the wife of Clopas, is the 3rd, and Mary Magdalene is the 4th. Naturalistically, it's a very touching scene. But seen from above, it's about something more than just human relationships. First of all, notice Jesus' mother is not named again, and in not naming her, she stands for something beyond just herself. The other telling thing is that the phrase, when Jesus knew that all was now finished, follows his action of, here is your son, here is your mother. So it's only after Jesus has given the beloved disciple to his mother and his mother to the beloved disciple, it's only then that the act of salvation is finished. So what is it about that plays into the larger plan of salvation? Something big is going on here, bigger than just these people. And the way I would answer that is that with Jesus' death, the true Christian who loves and is loved by Jesus now belongs to Mother Church and vice versa. So the beloved disciple stands in for the true Christian and the lover of Jesus. Jesus' unnamed mother comes to symbolize in this episode Mother Church. That's why the two of them belonging to one another now completes and finishes the plan of salvation. Like the synoptics, the fourth gospel shows a sponge with vinegar being lifted to Jesus' lips. And that invokes Psalm 69, in which the tormented one says that his tormentors have given him vinegar to drink. But what's different in the fourth gospel is that the sponge is lifted to Jesus because Jesus says something. He says, I thirst. That's unique to the Gospel of John, and it invokes another psalm, Psalm 42. As a deer longs for flowing streams, so my soul longs for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When shall I come and behold the face of God? My tears have been my food day and night, while people say to me continually, where is your God? It also harks back to something Jesus said in chapter 18, where he said, shall I not drink the cup that the Father has prepared for me? Also, in this interlude, the fourth gospel differs from the synoptics in that the sponge is lifted to Jesus on the end of a piece of hyssop. In the synoptics, it's a reed. Hyssop would not have worked. A reed might have, but hyssop would not, because it only grows to be about 2 feet long. And so it's not long enough to reach Jesus' lips. And unlike a reed, it's pretty floppy stuff. It would not have been able to hold the weight of a wet sponge on the end of it. Why has John converted the reed into hyssop? Symbolism again. Hyssop was used at Passover to sprinkle the blood of the Paschal lamb on the doorpost. It also is an invocation of Psalm 51, which contains verse 7, purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. The entire Psalm 51 is a song about deliverance, forgiveness, and purification, very much the things that are happening as Jesus expires on the cross. I thought you might like to see a few pictures here. We don't know exactly what the crown of thorns was made out of, but the leading candidate is thorny burnet, which is there on the left. On the right is a botanical drawing of hyssop, and you can see that it is pretty floppy stuff. The fourth gospel's account of Jesus' moment of death and what happens immediately thereafter is also unique to it. It's not found in the synoptics. As Jesus dies, he utters the word tetelestai. His final words are, "It has been accomplished." In other words, this has been the plan of Father and Son all along, to bring salvation. It has been accomplished. The goal has been reached, is another way to think of that. It is finished. And then it says Jesus hands over his spirit. But to whom does he hand it over? At first blush, it seems like maybe it's to the Father, but hang on to that thought and we'll come back to it. Unlike the victims crucified alongside him, Jesus' limbs are not broken. And that's an evocation of Jesus as the Paschal Lamb, because the bones of the Paschal Lamb are not to be broken, as prescribed by Exodus and Numbers. It also invokes Psalm 34. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him. He keeps all his bones. Not one is broken. And we will see in short order how the Lord will deliver him. Then the next thing that happens is that Jesus' side is pierced. And this harks back to Zechariah and the verse that says, "They shall look on him whom they have pierced." But what flows out of Jesus' side is really the key thing here. It's blood and water in that order. The blood carries away Jesus' earthly life. As it says in Leviticus 17, the life of the animal is in the blood. And so Jesus loses his life. That also cuts a new covenant between the Father and humanity, this sacrifice of a living being, and it reflects ancient practices of atonement. But then the water flows immediately after the blood. "If I do not go away, the Paraclete will not come to you, but if I go, I will send him to you." With the loss of his life, the loss of the blood, then the Spirit flows, the water that symbolizes the Spirit that was talked about in that way back in chapter 7. That flows from Jesus' side. And so the Spirit is being handed over, not so much to the Father. Jesus' Spirit is being handed over to us. As the scripture says, this is Jesus talking in chapter 7 and talking about believers. As the scripture says, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. By the way, none of the Old Testament passages that harks back to have the phrase out of his belly. And I think the gospel added that to the front end in order to look forward to this moment. In keeping with its theme of Jesus' true kingship, the fourth gospel sees to it that he's given a royal burial. As in the synoptics, Joseph of Arimathea plays a leading role in this, but in the fourth gospel, he's helped by Nicodemus. Nicodemus, who came to Jesus originally as a questioner, then appeared again as a defender, now makes his third and final appearance as a disciple of Jesus. And the two of them see to it that it's indeed a royal burial. They get 100 pounds of myrrh and aloes, something that would be appropriate for burial of a king. And also appropriate for the burial of a king, Jesus is interred in a new tomb, holy and dedicated. Also, by the way, since no one else has ever been laid in this tomb, it will make it crystal clear that there's no mistake when Jesus' body disappears later. And finally, we're told in the Gospel of John that this tomb is in a garden. And that raises the imagery of the King's Garden in the upper Kidron Valley. Doesn't say that's where we are, but it certainly harks back to that image of the King's Garden. All of this is in contrast to the hasty burial that Jesus is given in the Synoptics, one in which the press of time, the coming of sundown, which will start the Sabbath on that Friday, that's approaching so quickly that they have to quickly inter Jesus, and the women come back on Easter Sunday morning after the Sabbath is over to properly anoint the body. But here in the fourth gospel, Jesus is given a royal burial. In all four canonical gospels, Jesus' interment occurs just before the setting of the sun on the sixth day of the Jewish week, at a moment that commemorates the end of God's 6-day cycle of creation. And it's no accident that this sends the signal that the old creation is now finished. It is finished, as Jesus said on the cross. And a new cycle of creation is about to begin.